As we continue marking Women's Month, let's have this conversation now. Women living with disabilities face double discrimination based on gender and disability in both public and private spheres. They encounter deep social stigma such as gender-based violence, limited access to education, healthcare and employment. Let's expand on this with Deputy Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities in Steve Letsike, who joins us now via our video link. Great to have you on the program, Deputy Minister. Thanks very much indeed for making time. And I'm glad that, even the news cycle in some respects gives us an opportunity to pause for a while and have these hopefully introspective discussions about people who live at the intersection of really challenging identities. And today we decided to speak about not only those who are women, but women who live with disabilities. And I wonder to what extent you reckon enough time is actually taken to involve such people in discussions about ways through which essentially we could make their lives easier.
Thank you so much, Ayanda. Good morning to you and to the viewers of SABC. In fact, I think we must premise this conversation on the basis that we are a country that has a constitution that made promises, our section 9 of the constitution that stipulate that nobody should be discriminated on the basis of their ability or disability and many other grounds from that intersectional lens that you are making as a point here. But as a country, we've also made an undertaking. We are a signatory and we ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, which then says it is us and it's our responsibility to take care of our citizens. And those global commitment is not just frameworks, it's frameworks that then says what are the implementation efforts we are making. And that's why our ministry that is responsible also for persons with disability is working with all necessary line department to look at targets, to look at programs, but also to look at what needs to be implemented thoroughly.
Yeah. And who do you reckon is meant to essentially drive that commitment? Is it a state-driven initiative? Is it people who live at these intersections? Is it the activists on the ground who are constantly interacting with them? Is it all of the above?
This is a whole of society kind of response. We don't take this work for granted as government. We are working also with civil society organizations. We are working with private sector. So this is a whole of government intervention. You would understand we have a quarterly forum that is the Disability Missionary Forum that brings together key implementing partners, all focal people within premier's offices, within departments that are focusing on disability. We also bring organizations. You move from organizations that deal with deaf persons, with visual impairment and all other disability. We come together to monitor exactly what implementation is happening, what challenges we still have, because we cannot avoid a situation where we say or we pat ourselves on the shoulder to think that everything is really gloomy. We are only working with the white paper on the rights of persons with disability, and this term, of the administration, we are hoping that we would have finalized the bill. But this is a whole of society kind of response.
Yeah. Speak to us a bit more about this. I think you called it the Disability Missionary Forum. Who sits on the forum?
The various focal persons, every premier's office have got a focal person on rights of persons with disability and youth, or even gender for that matter. We have departments, specific departments like communication, Department of Small Business and Administration, or Small Business Development. You've got Department of Public Service Administration. You've got all various departments that are there for all their focal directors who sits on the disability missionary. And then you've got organizations, DPSA, which is Disability or Disabled Persons South Africa. You've got all different councils of persons with disability who sits on this forum, and we meet quarterly. We're focusing on some of the implementation gaps, some of the persistent disparities that puts people on vulnerable level. And as you have highlighted, you've lifted the month we are in, particularly also the women experience for that matter, because those experiences experiences do matter, and there are disparities that we are always focusing on. So we're looking at various kind of issues that move from economy to social, but also legal issues that we are, navigating. One of the key issues that was also on the table for the last couple of months was the issues around vulnerability to violence, that is experienced by persons with disability. The second issue was around access to education opportunity. We've released a report, that we were focusing on assessment on basic education, the issue around young or children with disability that are accessing education in special schools and so forth. What kind of credibility or that credential outcome of schooling does it hold power for persons or children with disability as opposed to mainstreaming school? And these are some of the things we are navigating as a country.
This is good to hear, but the sense I still get is that, in many respects, these kinds of initiatives are seen as periphery initiatives. And to be fair, it's not a South African problem. I think the world is yet to really center these issues, because if every life, as we claim, is equal, then these matters should also take high priority. What's your sense about whether or not that is taking place? Is there enough of a centering of these issues, even in the discussions that you have with your counterparts and certainly with others around the world?
Well, I think, there's something that we have to be guarding is to assume, that globally, we have not seen progress. We've seen progress over the 186 countries, that have ratified in this convention. It does demonstrate that countries like South Africa remains committed to serving its own population. Our government, under the administration led by President Ramaphosa, does see this progress around how we center a stronger legal framework, but also targeted interventions. I think if you look at some of the issues around whether we have progressed economic empowerment, the programs that target vocational training, digital inclusion, and workplace, inclusion, these are gradually being scaled up to counter high unemployment rate. Now, when you look at the reports itself, South Africa has to meet those targets that we've set for ourselves, even towards the 2030 agenda. We've got a 7% target. Now, we are monitoring whether all departments, all private sector institutions are meeting these targets. We are doing it at a snail pace. It's not moving as fast as we want, but we want to see this progress moving. So I think if at all we then say, there is this kind of an empty vessel, and I think it's a wrong perception, because the small scale that exists is the one we need to move with. But what we need to then is the accountability aspect, where people do a just approach in meeting those targets.
The other risk that I think, or rather the other pitfall I think most fall into when we have these discussions, is thinking of women with disabilities as a homogenous group. And of course, that couldn't be further from the truth, right? The disabilities vary, and therefore the needs vary as well.
No, certainly. I mean, this is the part, the point that I was raising around this, the persistent disparities, because women with disability experience significant higher rates of poverty, illiteracy, and vulnerability to violence compared to men or non-disabled peers, for that matter. And I think we've seen this evidence, the small-scale evidence, and part of what we thought it's necessary, even as an outcome of our G20 legacy, is to set up a data center. Evidence come in small scale, and it's anecdotal evidence that we are picking up in our country, but we do need to actually get enough research that allows us to plan better, budget better, but also implement better on evidence-based kind of programming in our country. And we are picking it up. If you're looking at the level where children or girl child versus, the growth path when you're talking about women in their adulthood, those disparities exist. And these kind of challenges we have to address, not only on paper, but also at the level of implementation. And these are some of the things we're paying attention on as a department.
I wonder if we can shift gears slightly, Deputy Minister, and speak about something perhaps that hits a bit closer to home, and that is that recognition you received at the International Pride Awards that were held recently. Perhaps I should start by saying congratulations are in order. You've been recognized as the 2026 Emerging Leader. What does the award entail? I mean, what exactly do you, at least in your mind, see them recognizing you for?
Well, I mean, thank you so much. Look, this is really, I mean, the World Pride, this is the biggest global gathering that takes place every 2 years, in the space. And you can imagine for the life that I've spent in social justice movement, but, I had a privilege, in the last 2 years, following the national general elections that took place in our country, that I went directly into politics, into parliament for the first time, but also immediately, with appointment made by, president into the executive. And I think it's quite important to look at how one has advanced, the visionary and dedication towards equality, but also towards transforming and transformational impact one has around women's issues, around LGBTI issues, and marginalized communities. So I really do, appreciate, this recognition by the global community. It was during the International Human Rights Conference that took place last week in Amsterdam, that this recognition happened. And I take this as a kind of responsibility and a burden as well, because it's not just about recognition, but it's about expectation that now the global community has in terms of providing that visionary leadership.
Speaking about the expectations, I'm sure many of those you've worked with in the activist space have great expectations now that you are part of the administration. But what's your personal experience about what you thought was possible when you were doing your activist work, and now what you see is the reality now that you're in government?
No, certainly. I think the spaces do differ. Government is so complex and has so many rules, and sometimes even unnecessary red tapes. When you think around what could be done, you are holding power to actually ensure that you advance the living conditions of people, whether you're talking about material conditions or whether you're talking about social conditions, because we are implementing and we are safeguarding the Constitution. And we believed at the time, even when I was in the social justice movement, that government can move faster. We need to delay how we improve the lives of people. And then when you get into the system itself, you realize how many barriers, how many checkpoints that you need to be stopping. It could be that it's necessary, but to some extent you realize that we could improve, we could reform, we could ensure that we change the status of administration. One of the key things which I admire about this seventh administration is what a president has prioritized, which is providing we need to provide this ethical and a competent administration. The state must be able to reform itself. It cannot be that when there's investment, it cannot be that when people need justice, it takes long. And we are seeing this shift is gradually taking shape, but it's very met with also some of the kind of barriers where others think, are we now changing what used to happen in the past? And those are some of the challenges that we have to navigate, not only from a political point of view, but also from an administrative and technical point of view, for that matter.
Was it easier being an activist?
It was much easier. You can make a call anytime. You can always shout out and make those claims and demand. But now you have to do the hard work, and that's where it is in the administration.
Well, hopefully you have a whole lot more compassion than for many of the people who you thought weren't moving fast enough. As a way to round off, and this is something I've also contemplated or thought about for some time, part of what these awards are about is also about visibility, right? Representation in places of significance. And I have found that in a country like ours, it's not very easy for leaders to wear their full identity for the public. Sure. And there's all manner of reasons for that. But there are nonetheless leaders who decide to do that. And I wonder for you, what your reflections insofar as that is concerned. You know, should we be pushing for a whole lot more of that kind of visibility because of the potential impact, essentially?
Well, I think, we do have to wear our identity. I think if at all we start living false life, it becomes a problem. Our history as South Africa, it's quite unique and it's quite one that is met by some of the oppressive past and history and context that is really painful for many people. But also our kind of democratic era that we live in is made up by a constitution that makes promises, that promise that that was declared that equality could not depend on whether you are black, white, or rich or poor or heterosexual or even LGBTI or person with disability for that matter. And I think this is why it matters to realize the diversity of our country, the uniqueness, and whether we can live the true self, but at the same time, or whether we are even committed to even course correct those injustices of the past, as it says. And we have to ultimately guard this democracy. We guard it with our life because it's personal and it's political and it's our past. And, that we navigate, challenges of the past. I mean, we are commemorating Women's Month. It's very important that we realize that we are still navigating patriarchal system. We are also still navigating racism and economic exclusion, that South Africans are experiencing. So the tensions that we see publicly, that we see in our communities, in our society, it's embedded in inequality. So we can't do that outside living ourselves and being honest with the kind of people we are as a country. If we are able to do that, we are able to understand also our population and how we can serve it better. So we need to deal with inequality, but we need to deal with the true self of our identity.
Yeah, and it's an act of bravery, and hopefully what is remembered is the fact that it allows other people to be brave too. Steve Letsike, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Really do appreciate the time. Steve Letsike is the Deputy Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities.